Yeshiva World.
You're not very tall, you have to stand to make sure everybody knows you're in the room. But now, the last time I had this many folks together who were from the Orthodox community, I was having Shabbat with Rich Roberts in Israel. And so I might stay longer if you're going to sing and dance around the table. He had the young men from the yeshiva, or doing the university year in Israel, who were singing in Hebrew, and it was actually very exciting. But my wife was with me at the time, and she commented on the TV and no electricity on Sabbath and all that, and I came home and I said, she's this close, you almost have her. Because she was thinking, boy, this is nice, it's so peaceful and calm, candles, no electricity, no TV player, and everybody's nice. So she's that close, she's on her way. But, when we came back from Israel and had our trip, it was a couple years ago now, the one thing I came away from, and I think a lot of people comment on this, is that the people over there have a great deal of friendship. And people talk about there being a special friendship. And you really get a feeling for that when you're over there, that throughout the Middle East we have so many problems. Throughout the world we have so many problems. We got people, who will burn our flag. And the one thing you come away from in Israel is that, I don't think you'll ever meet somebody there that would ever burn an American flag. So I think there is a special relationship and a special friendship. With regard to some of the things that I've been trying to do, I've been trying to point out some of the areas where I think our taxpayer money actually goes against things that we believe in. So last year I introduced something called the Stand With Israel Act. In that act I said that we should not be giving any money to a unity government that includes the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And I said, well, because I'm such a moderate, I said, yeah, we'll do it as long as Hamas says no more violence, ends the violence, and recognizes Israel. Because ultimately that's how we will get peace if people do that. But I didn't really see anything in the headlines indicating that Hamas was going to do that. But I am, appalled that our taxpayer money goes to Palestinian Authority and now to Hamas as a unity government, and that while they say the money wouldn't go to buy missiles, the money's fungible. So if the money goes to them for food, they're using other money for missiles. And I really see no reason why we shouldn't play more hardball. It's our money. We give over $400 million a year to the Palestinian Authority. So we made some headlines with that, and I think we're putting pressure on people, but it didn't actually come to a vote. Recently, though, the Palestinian Authority is once again rattling and saying they want to be part of the International Criminal Court, precisely because they want to bring up Israeli soldiers on charges of crimes. And there is already legislation that says that if they do this, they would lose their aid. But here's the problem. Everything we pass up here, we give a presidential waiver to. All of the sanctions relief right now for Iran is a waiver that's given to the president. And so even though right now, because they've said they're going to join the criminal court and they're saying they're going to do this, he should be stopping the aid. But he uses his waiver not to stop their aid. Part of fixing Washington and fixing not only the problems we have in this particular instance, but a lot of things, is Congress taking back their power. We have to take our power back. So one of the things that I'll be introducing in the next month or so is a bill that says the presidential waiver on Iran sanctions has to be renewed and voted on by Congress. It's an indirect way of saying that we have to vote on the final agreement. I think we do have to vote on any kind of final agreement, but really what we should be doing all along, the president should be coming back periodically and asking for approval of what he's doing. We give up too much of our authority. We say sanctions, 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 then we say, oh, unless the president doesn't feel like doing it. We do the same with all of our bills. We give a national security waiver. And I can understand the concept, but when we give the waiver, we ought to have a certain period of time when he has to come back and ask the Congress for permission. So I'm a big stickler on the separation of powers. I'm also a great believer in our traditions and your traditions. We're sort of part of the same sort of lineage of traditions. When Rich Roberts invited me to the Shabbat in Israel, he gave a speech, and in the speech he talked about loyalty. I think loyalty and tradition, these are amazing sort of things that in our rush to sort of change and in our rush to accept every kind of new thing that comes along, that when we give up traditions, when we give up ideas like loyalty, when we give up traditions like marriage, when we give up concepts like marriage and loyalty and taking care of our children, I think we're giving up a lot. And all I would like to say is that I'm one who's still going to continue to fight for those things I believe in. I think we have a lot in common, and I want to thank you very much for allowing me to come this evening.
The senator has been kind enough to accept a question or two. If there's anybody that would like to pose one.
And if they're hard, I'm giving them to Senator Johnson.
This is on Israel and what's going on with the, I don't want to talk about Netanyahu's speech because that's really very sensitive, but really with Iran, the problem seems to be is not if there is no deal or not if there's a deal, but if there is a deal and it's a bad deal, what will happen then? And that really seems to be what bothers everybody the most and does not seem to get the emphasis that it should.
You know, I think on the Republican side, we're very unified, and I think even many Democrats are in the position that any deal should be voted on by Congress. The sanctions, some of them were executive sanctions, but many of the sanctions, I think the vast majority of the sanctions were passed by Congress. And so even above and beyond the specifics of the negotiations, I'm a believer that the president shouldn't be allowed to legislate because that gets too much power in the hands of one person. So I believe that the sanctions can only be removed by Congress. And I have some mixed feelings about whether or not we should have new sanctions during the negotiations then. And I'm in a minority in my caucus. Most want new sanctions now or at a date certain. I'm concerned that if we were to have no negotiations, that then we're in a sort of a binary choice of either they get a weapon or we go to war. And while negotiations aren't perfect, and I don't think we can accept and trust them, we negotiated with the Russians. We negotiate with our enemies. And as long as we can verify that they're complying, then I think we should try to continue negotiations and not get to a point where we say no more talking. Because once we get to no more talk, then I think we're at a problem where even the military solution is not a great one. I don't think it necessarily deters them forever, slows them down a little bit. Part of the one thing we have going for us in Iran is that 70% of the people are 35 and under. They're much more pro-Western than the older guard, and the religious authorities that run the nation, I think, are a minority, but you can't stand up and there's no free government, so there's not going to be anything immediately happening. But I'm afraid if we get involved with a war, what happens to those young people who might lean pro-Western when the bombs begin to drop? I think that we may, their nationalism may be excited and we may have less likelihood of them overthrowing the mullahs. But I think we have to defend ourselves, we have to defend our interests, and we have to do everything we can to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon.
Senator, if I could follow up. I'm encouraged by the prospect of such a bill, and I would assume that members in Congress would also be encouraged. You're going to your colleagues and saying, we should be able to verify. Not a Republican or a Democrat saying that. The Congress should be able to verify that. And I'm also skeptical to say if the senator, who's on record of not supporting sanctions at this time, should be able to get some traction on your bill simply because you're not aligning yourself with those who are calling for sanctions.
Right. Well, one of the things, if I could convince everybody, would be that if we voted on repealing his waiver on the sanctions, it doesn't say what the exact deal has to be. My problem with some of the sanctions bills, the new ones, I voted for all the old ones, but this latest one is that it, I think, dictates too specifically the outcome of what the negotiations have to be. So I think it gets in the way of negotiations by dictating the outcome. But if we were to get rid of the waiver, it does send a strong signal to President Obama and to the negotiators that, look, we have the ability to prove this, and we are going to exert that, so we're not going to go for a bad deal. So I think I think Obama's administration, if it's possible, their resolve gets better if we take away his waiver, or we say, you know, your waiver now has 90 days left, and at the end of 90 days, we're voting on your waiver, whether it's a deal or no deal. And it's a little bit of an indirect, and it may be a nuance, but I think it's a way to try to pressure the negotiations without saying exactly what the end point of the negotiations have to be. But there's a chance. We'll see.
Just one more follow-up quickly, unless somebody else wants to say something. Would you agree with Secretary of State Kissinger that the policy of the United States has no longer become prevention but containment? I
think Kissinger's one of the smartest guys out there. And I think that when Kissinger also, I think his analysis of the Middle East probably contains more knowledge than probably a lot of us put together. You know, he's got 40, 50 years of this now. And, but I'm not so sure that there is an easy alternative to a different policy. For example, with the ISIS situation, I think the most important thing that we could do is having Arab boots on the ground in the war. And NATO, Turkey's supposed to be a NATO ally. The way to get the Turks involved, to my mind, but you'd have to do something nobody's talking about. I would offer the Kurds the promise of a homeland, a real homeland with a country. They're the best fighters over there other than Israel. I would offer them what they've got. I would also offer them a piece of the top of Iraq and a piece of the top of Syria, where they are the dominant tribe. And I think all of a sudden you'll find fighters like you've never seen. But to get the Turks involved, the Kurds would then have to promise they're done fighting the Turks. The problem is the Turks don't like the Kurds because they've been fighting them. There's a dissident group for 70 years. They also don't like Assad, and it's a question whether or not they dislike Assad and the Kurds more than they dislike ISIS. But it is a confusing situation. In Syria, there's 2 million Christians. The Christians in Syria are not real happy about ISIS being in charge of their country. They actually prefer Assad over that. So it's a confusing situation. Some in my party want to bomb Assad and ISIS simultaneously. I think you'll have a complete chaos. You already have pretty close to chaos, but I don't think we should be bombing both sides of the war. I also think ISIS grew stronger as we poured millions of tons of weapons into the Syrian civil war. I think what happened is ISIS grew stronger as all those weapons flowed into the civil war. Somebody said, there was a CIA agent the other day, he said, the only thing moderate about the Syrian rebels is their ability to fight. We give weapons to them, and the weapons go on to ISIS. The other thing is there's 1,500 groups fighting in the Syrian civil war. Not one of them recognizes Israel. In fact, one group we gave anti-tank weapons to said when they're done with Assad, they're going for the Golan Heights. I think we have to be wary of giving weapons to people who really hate us, hate Israel, and right now they also hate Assad, but when they're done with Assad, who do you think, are they ever going to be our friends? The Kurds, I don't think are like that, and I could be wrong, but I think the Kurds actually are people who really value and want to be independent, and if we would promise them that and arm them. Right now the arms have to go through Baghdad, and they aren't getting to the Kurds. We're throwing away arms in Afghanistan. I would take the arms in Afghanistan and I'd give them to the Kurds directly. I would put money and arms into the hands of the Sunni chieftains that fought in the surge. They can be purchased.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.